10x your service design offering with Smapply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at smapply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Smapply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Hi everyone, my name is Adrienne Tan. I'm a co-host at This Is HCD podcast. Before we begin, as this podcast was recorded in the Sydney CBD, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the land where we meet today and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Tonight, I'm speaking to Ivy Hornibrook, who'll talk us through her career transition from UX into product management. Hi Ivy, thanks for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your career.
My background is in UX design or in human-centered design, but before I entered into product management, my roles were actually very hybrid. I used to call myself the UX team of not quite one after Lee Bewley's book, The UX Team of One, and always got a lot of laughs at events and meetups. What I realised as I was progressing through my career is that all the other things that I did were actually, that's what product management was. Things that involved managing stakeholders, things that involved prioritising or working with the tech team. So it's always a difficult question for me to answer when people ask me about what my background is, how long I spent in UX and how long I spent in product. That's a long-winded answer, but I guess briefly, I spent 6 years working in New South Wales Government. In New South Wales Government, I was head of digital programs with responsibility for product and UX. And a few years ago, I left New South Wales Government, did a whole lot of soul searching, thought about working in service design, thought about product management, and now eventually I've ended up as a head of product for a startup here in Sydney.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to delving deeper into that topic. So can you start off by telling us why you decided to move into product management? I know you alluded to it because you were doing some of the product management tasks, but what drove you really to change career from being this UXer or classified as a UXer into a head of product?
When I first started working in digital, the first label that I found that fit was UX. I was doing things like I was running workshops, I was doing co-design, I was doing things like card sorting. So all of these activities, I thought, that must be UX. And I remember heading along to my first UX Australia. And at UX Australia, there was this feeling that I had found my people, I'd found my tribe. It was a way of thinking that just resonated with me. It was a way of approaching problems and something that I deeply believed was what mattered in order to create great products. As I thought about it a little bit more though, I realised that the thing that I enjoyed most about UX was deeply understanding the customer, deeply understanding how somebody was actually going to interact with things that we create, but not only that, but understanding how it was going to make an impact in their lives. And that understanding the problem that we would solve by something that was created through, say, products, that was the essence of what I enjoyed most. Looking at roles, though, what I found was that a lot of UX is actually, at this point in time, it's often in the production phase, it's in the delivery. The problem has been defined by business strategy, by product strategy, and the role of the UX designer, researcher is often to validate and to work within those constraints. I also thought, now, service design is an area where you can take that step back, you can reframe the problem, so perhaps service design is the area that I should look into. But for most service designers, at least in Sydney, there aren't very many service designers working client side that get to see through a problem all the way through to the compromises, to the trade-offs, the constraints that inevitably arise as you work through a problem and make it reality. Then looking at, I guess, all of these elements, product was one role where you get to be there at the beginning, thinking about the problem, really interrogating, is this worth doing? but you're also there holding that understanding of the customer to take it through to what will eventually become reality.
That's so good to hear that you see that product really is core to understanding that customer problem. I'm sorry to hear though that UX plays the role further down the stream rather than being a partner of product, essentially trying to discover the problem together.
That's an interesting thought, Adrienne. I've actually, one of the reasons I wanted to go into product as well was I felt that product often has a role to play in determining the process that products become reality. So by being a product manager who understood the value of design, I thought this is where I can influence to involve designers at the right time, because they do have such a great role to play and so much to offer. But if the organisation culture or the processes haven't been that way in the past, then I thought that the role of a product manager could then open up those channels for design to contribute at the right time.
Absolutely. And, we've always said that product has a lot to do in the whole process. That's why product management's really hard to define, because you go from concept right up to retirement, and that's a very long period of time. But UXers have that kind of experience that they can partner with product to definitely do a better job trying to understand the customer problem. But just trying to understand your move into product a little bit better, can you describe the steps you took to move into product in Sydney? And I say Sydney because it's got a good thriving startup culture, yet we also have these big organisations that also have big product teams in it. So you've got a bit of both.
So as I said before, the first label, I guess, that I found that fit was UX originally. And so I didn't actually know very much about what product management meant. The first step for me was understanding, okay, I've heard about this thing called product. Well, what is it? Does it apply to the things that I want to do? And how do I find that out? Started by going to meetups. I find that in those kind of groups, you do get a sense of the people that are there, the roles that they do, and contextualised in terms of the organisations that the speaker might be from or the conversations that are had. That was the first step, but I still wasn't completely sure. And I must say, the Leading the Product conference, which is the product management conference, when I went to that conference, that was the time when I went, right, okay, I think there's something here. I think that this is a term for the parts of the process that I want to focus on, the places where I think I can bring most value. It was quite, for me, a bizarre world being at that conference. It felt as though there was all of these concepts I was so familiar with from design, but just a slightly different vocabulary.
Oh, interesting.
And I remember the first thing I thought I needed to do was to map the vocabulary of product to UX. Now, my background is I have a major in English. I should probably have known that it's never just a matter of vocabulary. But at the time I thought, okay, what UX and design is always called users, product calls customers. What we call user research, product looks at through the lens of testing and validation. What I didn't realise at the time is that customers aren't just users in different clothing. That's actually an emphasis on monetizable value. It's an emphasis on the different responsibilities of a product manager. But that first step, I thought, right, map some vocabulary, read a lot of Medium, go to meetups, rebrand myself as the product manager, start applying for jobs.
Excellent. And how was that job seeking process like? Did you find that there were challenges moving into product from a UX role?
Certainly I did. What I found was, one thing that I know now is product managers very rarely get roles by applying for them from a job board. And this isn't something that was obvious to me. I think it's probably something that's not obvious to those who are considering.
Is that different in UX though?
Most of my UX experience was in one organisation that I spent quite a lot of time in. So I was there for 6 years, and there were opportunities to move, and now that you mention it, those opportunities never came from applying for a position. Those opportunities came from having great conversations with people at conferences. There was a time I had too much leave at work, so I knocked on the door of a design agency in Sydney and said, can I just intern with you for a couple of weeks? And at the end of it, they said, you're not an intern. Do you want to come work for us? So I think you're right, Adrienne, it's not about applying to job boards. It is about who you know, how you know them, how you're able to demonstrate the strength of your craft, because it's very hard to discern the skills of both a designer and a product manager from a cover letter and a few pages of CV.
So when you did start to apply for some roles, do you think the hiring managers were excited about your UX skills and they could easily position you in product? Or was there some translation required?
Definitely not. I thought they would be.
Yeah, I would be excited.
I read role descriptions that said deep understanding of the customer, and I thought, well, this is my craft, this is what I do. What I found was that although that understanding was in every role description and at the essence of what is considered to be good practice in product management, the skills that speak more loudly are skills in data analysis, skills in engineering especially. I found a lot of role descriptions and a lot of hiring managers that expected a technical background. And I actually remember applying for a role, and this was one that I had an internal referral, and the recruiter came back to me and said that they wouldn't be proceeding even with a phone screen because the role had moved away from a UX focus to a data-driven one. I remember being offended, but the reason why I was offended was coming from human-centered design, coming from a design background. I felt fundamentally that a data-driven approach and a design-led approach are both about making decisions informed by evidence. What did it mean that to move away from a UX focus to something data-driven? You need to be able to identify your assumptions, to be able to test your hypotheses, to be able to get data about why the direction you want to take is the right one. I got a phone screen, but I didn't proceed much further than that. I think the mistake that I made was the one piece of vocabulary. I alluded to this earlier. I wasn't willing to let go of users versus customers. I felt as though that would betray the values that I believed were so important about solving problems that are worth solving, about understanding humans as humans and not just about their monetary value. And it wasn't until I'd spent more time actually as a product manager that I understood, well, someone's got to pay for what you do. It doesn't matter if the problem that you have is going to change the world. It doesn't matter if you're working in government or not-for-profit or in social enterprise, an innovation lab in a large corporate. Somebody's still funding it for a reason. And you might be able to change the world, but you're going to cease to exist if someone isn't willing to pay for it. And now that I've spent some time working as a head of product, I think I'm better able to articulate the value of why design matters and how it can actually really benefit product management, how doing something like a service blueprint helps you to understand the impact not only on the development team, but that there's a cost also in how you support the product, completely. The touch points, how the brand is affected. It's looking at things through the commercial lens of your stakeholders, but being able to bring the toolkit and the methods of design in a way that can also change the way the product is done.
Absolutely. And I think people forget that. People associate your toolkit with a role, and that's not necessarily the case. A role is simply, set of activities that you carry out, and the tools that you bring can come from various different kinds of practices, theories and frameworks. And for us in product, the tools and the practices and the frameworks come not only from design, but come from, engineering. Some of it comes from architecture, but strategic management, strategic marketing. We bring a whole range of tools with us to get the job done. But I'm very excited to hear that, your human-centered design toolkit is really of great use to you in product. And so when you started your role as a product manager, and I know you had one previous to this role as head of product, what was unexpected or a surprise to you about jumping into product management? You know, when you first started your job, what did you go, oh my God, I really love it or really hate it, or that was unexpected?
I think certainly how much it differs between organisations and how little shared understanding there is about what a product manager actually does. So
can I stop you there? Do you think you find the same for UX though? Or is it less for UX, but definitely more so for product?
I think there's still variation, but I've often observed that as far as the community goes, as far as the specialisation goes, that understanding, I feel as though product in Sydney and in Australia is a few years behind where UX was. So I remember the size of UX Australia, for example, about 6 or 7 years ago, and if you compare that to the size of some of the events in product now, also thinking about today that's probably a bad example, but there are UI designers, there are UX researchers, there are other fields that are more starting to define themselves. So certainly service designers, UX strategists is emerging as well. Some of those definitions continue to be contested, and sometimes I feel as though they're continuing to define themselves against some of the other specialisations, but those terms are starting to take meaning that companies understand, that designers certainly understand, but that specialisation isn't yet the case for product managers. And even what lines you may draw that upon, whether it is about the size and the maturity of a company, whether it's about core experience versus innovation, there isn't a whole lot of consistency about how product managers are segmented. So I think that's quite different. What is similar though is the level of education you need to do about the value of your craft. Just as in design, I felt as though it's a constant case of advocacy for why this approach, these methods have a lot of benefit and a lot of value to bring. I think the same is the case for product management, so that designers aren't reduced to wireframes, product managers aren't reduced to requirements. That wider education piece and that advocacy is true for both.
Yeah, it's incredible. Product management has been around for so long. It started off in the 1930s in fast-moving consumer goods where they needed to differentiate between one soap to another. And yet after all of these years, we're still trying to struggle defining our role and our position and our benefits in organisations. And it's a more mature profession than UX. It's just that we're terrible at branding ourselves. We're terrible at promoting what we do. And because of the differences in company sizes and industry, that does have an impact. But yet, as a profession, we've not done a very good job.
And yet it has the same impact for designers. And that's not how, I guess, designers have segmented. It's looking at the roles that you play within an organisation. And it could be that that's the way that product management goes as well when you're looking at it. It's starting to do so, I think, with product marketing, for example, which previously was, for some roles, the primary part of a product manager's role.
Yep. There's product owners, there's product analysts, there's product strategists. There's quite a few roles. It's just that we don't speak well of our own kind of profession. We don't have the same kind of vernacular. Was there anything else that was surprising apart from the fact that, it's a misunderstood term, it's a misunderstood role, and it's defined differently across different businesses?
How much writing you do.
Yes.
Adrienne, I know you're a fan of writing as a way to articulate thoughts, but even so, having spent so many years advocating other methods of communication, especially the power of visual communication, I was surprised at how much I now had to rely on the written word. And I do find that to be a struggle at times, because I know that there can be better ways to create understanding when the wall of words just becomes something that obscures rather than creates clarity. So it's been interesting in how to actually bring other methods of communication, other methods of documentation, also actually the way that teams collaborate. So at the heart of Agile and at the heart of Kanban and many of those other methodologies, this idea of cross-functional teams is at its core. But I actually find that a lot of teams are doing this quite poorly. So again, this is something where I think bringing the design skills of facilitation and how to have quite constructive collaboration, that's something that's been quite surprising to me.
That's very interesting. But yes, I know. I can sympathise with lots of product managers out there who have to do PowerPoint deck after PowerPoint deck, take stakeholders along the journey. Yes, and there's absolutely, if you can use different methods of communications, especially visual communication, then by all means we definitely support it. And I think that's great though, everybody comes from everywhere in product management. You've got BAs, project managers and UXs. I think that adds to the flavour of product as well, and you bring your own kind of tools and techniques to hopefully lift the profession. And so my final question really is, what advice do you have for those in UX looking to make the move into product? What would you tell them to do?
I think you'd be surprised at how much of the job you've done before for all UXs. What I find happens is that it's a role that needs to be filled. It's to create vision and clarity and direction, to be able to prioritise. And in the absence of someone fulfilling a product manager role, that role falls often to UX, it falls often to engineering, sometimes a split between the two. But what that means is that a lot of UX people have done some version of the role before. But on top of that, what you bring to product management, Adrienne, you alluded to it a moment ago, everyone comes to products from somewhere else, and that somewhere else will simultaneously be your greatest asset as well as your greatest weakness. As a UXer, your skills are in creating empathy, in creating that understanding, and you almost have a sixth sense for usability. Those things will often give you a great product sense, but what I said before, the things that aren't going to come as naturally for most people is understanding that although that problem and that pain point is really worth solving, how to then map that back to the commercial context, how to map that back to where is the business model. It might be a really worthwhile user problem to solve, but somebody does have to pay for it. So keeping in mind that empathy is going to be one of your greatest tools, but also that you need to be able to rise out of that and think about what you were most responsible for.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ivy.
Thanks, Adrienne. It's been great being here.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you'd like to be a part of the conversation or community, hop on over to thisishcd.com. You can request to join the Slack channel and help shape the future episodes and connect with designers around the world. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.